and this is for you, Jim. I think we're all agreed that we have a dysfunctional international currency system. We have a central bank that sets interest rates that create speculative bubbles that infuse moral hazard into the system, and we have a plethora of redundant and complex financial regulation that probably has unintended consequences. And it would be marvelous to go back to this ideal world that has been described, in which everything was more or less hunky-dory. But do we really believe in this current world that we could actually re-establish the gold standard? I was checking today the McKinsey report on deleveraging. It says that Japanese total debt outstanding is 500% of GDP. Spanish private sector debt is 225% of GDP. British financial debt is 200% of GDP. With these enormous debt structures, if you were to impose a gold standard, that sort of deflation, the sort of collapse, what the gold standard was capable of doing was actually collapsing fragile credit structures. But we've now built credit skyscrapers that would come falling down upon us. And I think when the British went back in the 1920s, one of the reasons they failed on to go back to gold standards is that in an age of welfare and unions, wages are sticky, and therefore they didn't clear, the wages didn't come down and operate. So my concern is both the stickiness of labour and these extraordinary debt structures that, frankly, if I were given a choice between deflation to get rid of them or inflation, I'm afraid I'd hold my nose and take the inflationary route.
So the question is, can we go back?
The question is, could one really, I mean, is this just pie in the sky?
Could one really what?
Could one really do it?
Yes.
And to the debt. The debt.
Just a couple of points before we open this up for the ventilation of better questions. The British had this way, Edward, of returning to the gold standard bloody-mindedly at rates prevailing before the wars they won. They did that in the Napoleonic Wars, and they did it again in 1925. So doing, against the explicit advice of their friends in France, they crushed labor, they crushed the price level. But it was their decision. They didn't have to go back at a rate that was deflationary. There's nothing inherently deflationary with the gold standard. It depends the rate at which you make your currency exchangeable into gold. It depends on the statutory rate you choose.
So can I just hold you there? I mean, you could say the euro works in some ways like the gold standard, providing a discipline to the periphery of Europe. The currencies that went in, like, the periphery of Europe weren't overvalued. They became overvalued. And now Spain, in a way, the situation facing Spain would be much the same under a gold standard as it is under the euro, with 25% of the population unemployed, no prospect of devaluation, and
there's a prospect.
Well, no willing prospect, a financial prospect.
Well, it's a heck of a fix, and I'm not sure that the gold standard is the answer to all these problems, but it seems to me that the record of the gold standard in sum is a record, by and large, of growth and in the macro sense, and of personal accountability in the banking or the micro sense, and that perhaps the audience has some questions about whether it might not be a preferable system.
Good. So with that, would anyone like to come forward?